So this is the equation for weighted average cost of capital. I want to look at this conceptually before we get bogged down into any of the very simple math, but lots of variables. So I want to start with the concept that we're going to think about the company's capital structure. And we can say the company's capital structure is its common stock, which is represented by the variable E, plus its preferred stock, which is represented by the variable P, plus its debt, which is represented by the variable D. So E plus P plus D gives us the value, or variable V, of the company's capital structure. Do not confuse this with enterprise value. We talked about that a little bit last week. It's a little bit different. Enterprise value would have been where I subtracted cash in this equation to get to enterprise value. V is not equal to enterprise value, or EV, okay? So these three variables are simply representing the company's capital structure, not its enterprise value. And if I know the value of E and P and D, that means I know V, and I then can know what percentage of the company's capital structure is represented by common stock, what percentage is represented by preferred stock, and what percentage is represented by debt by taking E and dividing it by V, P and dividing it by V, and D and dividing it by V. These are the weights. The E divided by V, P divided by V, D divided by V. Those are the weights in the weighted average cost, okay? And the RE, or the return or cost on equity, common stock, and RP, or return or cost of preferred capital, and RD, or return or cost of debt, are the costs of the capital elements. So they help us with the weighted average cost of capital. I want you to notice that I'm using the term R, which typically stands for return, and I'm using the term cost synonymously. So Mandy, let's assume that you're my banker, and you've given me a loan. You're going to come off of mute, please. You've given me a loan at a 10% interest rate. You're my banker. What interest rate will I pay on this loan? What will be my cost of borrowing?
The 10%?
10%, right? That's how much I'm going to have to pay. What will be your return on this loan in percentage terms?
10%.
10%. Simple as that, right? Well, if there are some transaction costs or other things in here, then we might say, yeah, that it muddies the water a little bit. But if it's a loan, and if I'm paying 10% and you're getting 10%, your return and my cost are expressed in the same percentage terms, right?
Yeah.
I just said the return and cost were substitutable variables, didn't I? They're the same thing. But they're a function of the perspective. So I say they are two sides of the same coin. We're looking at the same thing, aren't we, Mandy? You're looking at it from the investor standpoint. I'm looking at it from the borrower standpoint. It's the same thing. So you'll see that we will use interchangeably the term cost and return as we talk about so many of these elements. This harkens back to Marxian economics, and I am by no means a Marxian economist, okay? It harkens back to Marxian economics, and that's where we get some of our variables from. In fact, you'll find the variable for cost is substitutable with the variable for return, and we normally see it expressed with the variable K. K for cost, or Karl Marx in the original German. That's where the K variable came from, okay? Well, with that, in order to calculate this weighted average cost of capital, we need to know the values for E, P, and D, and we need to know the values for the costs of capital, and we need to know a tax rate. And as long as we know all of those things, which as it turns out is a lot, we know the weighted average cost of capital. Recognize that that cost of capital is simply one of the various forms that a discount rate may take. You'll recall from your economic class and your MBA 603 financial statement analysis class, you'll recall time value of money. And that if we try to put a present value on a future expected amount, that we discount it by some rate. Well, the rate that we discount, if we're coming at something from the perspective of the firm, is the firm's weighted average cost of capital. WACC is simply a form of a discount rate. The discount rate that we might use if we're coming at it from the standpoint of an investor is my opportunity cost. If I know as an investor that I routinely can get about a 13% return on investment, because on average when I go to the investment markets and I invest my money well, I end up with about a 13%. I know that that's my discount rate. That's my expected return. So I have some way of looking at these, okay? So how do we come up with these numbers? Well, E, the way that we're going to look at it, is the market value of common equity. Let's look at Marriage Ravana for a moment. Here's my market value of common equity. Now again, we may face the problem here in just a moment that I'm using some values that were from Marriage Ravana that were based on an update, and I didn't translate that update into PowerPoint, and I'm terribly sorry if that's the case. Like my guess is that's what we're going to see, and again, I apologize. I'll update this and get it to you later on tonight. So the market value of this would be 128.11. In fact, I think I know where the difference came, so bear with me here. I think that this was 4.5, and this was 2.3. Let me see if that takes us to the right numbers. No, it does not. So excuse me. I thought I was going to be able to bring it back to where these two sources would be the same, and I apologize. That wasn't the change. So here we have 128.11 is the market value of the firm's common. Well, that's because it's 55.7 million shares times $2.30 a share gives us 128.11 million. Okay. Same thing here for the outstanding preferred stock. We have 4.3 million shares times $1.15 per share gives us 4.945 million. And those would be the values of E and P. Well, that's nice and straightforward. You guys are more often than not going to have that information. That's the good news. So we have E and we have P. Those are the market values. By the way, you're going to find that I will rarely refer to a book value from here out because this is finance. It's not accounting. It's all about the here and now, and finance values are where, market values are where things live. However, sometimes we have to take book value as though we're a market value, and you'll see a little bit more about that as we go through our evening. Well, we just found E and we found P. How do we find D? So let's look at that for a moment. Well, D is going to be debt. So let's go back to the Marriage Ravana for a moment. And we see that on the balance sheet, Marriage Ravana has some mortgages and has some bonds. It could have just as easily had some bank loans. It could have had a credit line. So what capital debt do we take using the market value and the book value as being the same value? And what capital debt do we actually calculate a market value for the debt? And I will tell you that it falls into some categories. So if it's a bank loan, we will use the book value as though it is market value, assuming it's a fully amortized loan. Why will we do that? Because we don't have a nice, neat little formula to suggest otherwise. There isn't a simple equation to suggest otherwise. And on a fully amortized bank loan, if I walk into the Bank of Cureless today and have an amortization schedule that says I still owe $100,000 on the loan and say I'm willing to pay $120,000 to pay this off, Lisa's going to look at me and wonder what insane asylum I just walked out of, because I'm offering to give her $120 for something that she's willing to accept $100 for, right? We have a contract, don't we, Lisa? Fully amortized loans are governed by their contract, and they tend to be not easily liquid or tradable. Similarly, if I walked in and said, hey, look, Lisa, I know it says here I owe you $100,000, but I believe I should be able to pay this off for $80,000, she's going to look at me like I'm nuts, and she's going to shake her head just like she's doing now, right? And she'll allow her attorneys to deal with me and hold me up for a while.
So Rick, when you say fully amortized, you just mean that the contract terms have been set for the full life of the loan and the frequency and amount of payments have been determined, and that's not an uncertainty.
And one more element, Matt, that every time a payment is made, I'm paying some principal and some interest.
Okay.
So it has to meet all of those conditions to be amortized. So a mortgage is fully amortized unless it's interest only. A car loan is fully amortized.
What would be an example of an unamortized loan?
An interest-only loan. Do any of you have HELOCs, home equity lines of credit, on your housing? If you do, a home equity line of credit typically is interest only. It is not fully amortized.
Okay.
A bond that is representative of debt for the company is not fully amortized because bonds come in $1,000 increments and they pay interest only. And at the end of the life of the bond, the original outstanding amount still is due. Bonds are not fully amortized.
Gotcha.
Okay. So bank loans will always take them as though the book value is the market value, assuming they're fully amortized. And we rarely have information to help us suggest to the contrary. Well, what sets up the difference between a book value on a debt and a market value? Well, what sets that up is the interest rate. You should remember some of this from your prior economic and finance class in your program. So if Bella has loaned me, or if Bella extends some debt from her company at 10%, let's say it's a bond, and she extends that debt at 10%. So I invested in Bella's company, and I'm getting a 10% coupon rate. So twice a year, I get half a year's worth of interest on whatever amount I invested in Bella's company. She has to pay it to me. That's part of the bonds agreement. And during the lifespan of this, interest rates change. So they go down to 6%, let's say. When Bella issued the debt, it was at 10%, and that is set, so she's always got to pay me 10%. But now interest rates in the marketplace have fallen to 6%. Kate, which would you pay more for? Something giving you a $60 a year cash flow, or something giving you a $100 a year cash flow?
$100.
I think so, Kate, because you might have been born at night, but not last night, right? You're going to value the item that gives you more heavily. Well, that helps us understand in very brief terms why, when interest rates go down, existing debt instruments rise in value. So the 10% debt has a greater value in the marketplace than the 6% debt, right? Because it gives more of an interest income to its holder. Well, there's an equation, and we'll look at the equation in a few minutes. You should remember, you've been exposed to it hopefully at least once or twice in the past. It's the market value of bond equation, and it sets up that difference. Now, that said, credit lines have a couple of attributes. Credit lines are corporate instruments, or maybe they're personal instruments. A HELOC is a credit line, and they are virtually always interest only, which means the interest rate that the client pays interest based on is changing with the market interest rate, right? So the rate that the interest is paid on, or the coupon rate, and the current rate in the market today are always the same number for a credit line. And because those are always the same number, there's no friction between the two. They can't be different, which means that the book value of a credit line and the market value of a credit line are the same number. A couple of other items on this that might be worthwhile to you. Credit lines typically have 10-year lifetimes. So if I've gotten my credit line from the Bank of Mario, I almost certainly have signed a 10-year contract, and I know that I can use that credit line for 10 years and that I'm paying interest only on it, and the rate is going to be adjustable based on the market. But at the end of 10 years, whatever is still owing on that, I owe it at that moment in time. That's a little bit different than a formal or amortized bank loan, right? I'm going to take the book value and the market value as being the same number as I think about the value of debt. Notes receivable are simply long-term accounts receivable. We'll use the book value and the market value as though they're synonymous. But now we get to the market value of bonds, where we have to remember that the book value, which we see on our balance sheet, the book value may have nothing to do with the market value. The book value of a bond is $1,000. The amount that it's issued at is the amount it's going to mature at. The book value is $1,000. But the market value may have changed in the interim. If the bond was issued when interest rates were at 7%, but now they've gone up to 8%, then the market value of the bond, has it gone up or has it gone down? Remember my example at 10 and 6% a moment ago? Yeah, that's right, Lisa. Well, no, excuse me. If they were at 7% and they've gone up to 8%, so if the rates go up, the value goes down. Just like when the rates go down, the value goes up. It's a seesaw effect. It's a counter-correlated effect. Okay? So let's look at the equation for a market value of a bond. Let me back up just a second. I know that when I look for D, or this variable D in my equation, I'm looking for the market value of debt. I'm going to find it by taking the book value of some of my debts as though they were market value, but I'm going to have to calculate the market value of a bond because I know I have an equation that will do that. I don't have to worry or wonder about it as long as I calculate it properly. And here is that equation. Yes, Matt?
All right, just two questions on that last slide about, I guess, the credit lines and the bonds. So the credit line, unless I'm thinking about it wrong, but just when I think in terms of a credit line, is a credit line is, somebody does some underwriting and they say, okay, we approve you for this line of credit. So if you need to borrow, you've got this amount at your disposal. But you don't actually take on the debt until you actually borrow, right? So how does that fit into a long-term debt on your actual statements? Because to me, like if I'm a bank and I underwrite somebody for a credit line, I'm going to record that as a loan on my financials because I've made that guarantee that they can borrow. But if I'm the borrower, I don't see how that would work unless you actually took out a loan on the credit line.
That's a really good question, Matt. And the answer has to do with the amount on the balance sheet is only the amount that is currently outstanding. So let's say I have a $500,000 credit line with Mario's bank. But just like a credit card, I'm not using all of it today. Oh yeah, I took $100,000 out, I paid $50,000 back, I took another $200,000 out, I paid it all back. It's in and out, right? Which, by the way, is one of the reasons the interest rates are adjustable, because Mario doesn't know when he's going to have what outstanding on that one, right, to have for interest earnings. That's why they're adjustable. So in this case, I'm going to have the outstanding amount on the balance sheet as the book value, not what amount could possibly be outstanding. So the extent of my credit line isn't going to show up on the balance sheet, only the amount that's being used as of that moment in time.
Okay, got it. That's kind of what I thought. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're setting up a big contingent liability, right?
Right. And on the bond, just to make sure I heard you right, and maybe it's because it's been a while, but I was always under the impression that, okay, let's say a bond gets purchased and it's the interest rate at that time, like you said, is 7%.
At the point the bond is purchased from the company or in the open market?
Let's just say in the open market.
Okay, so it's after it was originally issued.
Right.
Okay.
Or I guess in my scenario, I'm not even thinking in those terms. I'm just thinking the difference between, you're saying if the interest rates go up to 8%, that the bond value goes down, the one that's at 7%.
Yes.
And is that because, I think I get it now, that's because the ability to sell that compared to a new bond that's issued that's going to pay an 8% interest rate is going to be harder because there's better investments, i.e. the higher rate bond at the 8%.
It's just the opposite of the item I posed to Kate a few minutes ago. So Kate, you were willing to pay more for something that would give you 100 than you were to pay something that would give you 60, right? So let's assume now that we have this $1,000 bond, because all bonds are, for our purposes at least, all bonds are incremented in $1,000 increments. And if we issued the bond at a 7% rate, so it's paying $70 a year, and now interest rates are at 8%, so a new bond would pay $80 a year. Which would you pay more for, the $80 item or the $70 a year item? Well, the 80, of course. Which means if the 80 is worth 1,000, because that's what it's valued at when it's originally issued, that means that we would pay less for the one that's only giving us 70. So when interest rates go up, bond values go down, and vice versa. Now the dynamics of change become greater the further we are away from the maturity date of the bond, which might make sense. Okay? Let's look at the equational structure, and we can then talk about some elements of bonds as we do so. So this equation, market value of bonds, is simply a time value equation. What does it mean? C stands for the coupon payment, which is the face value, and face value is virtually always $1,000, times the coupon rate. Now, coupon rate is the interest rate at which the bond is issued. So the coupon payment is the face value of the bond, $1,000, times that coupon rate, or the interest rate at which the bond is issued, divided by the periods per year that the bond pays interest. Virtually all corporate and government bonds pay interest semi-annually. So that's virtually, for our purposes, the periods per year will always be 2, okay? And for our purposes, the face value will always be $1,000. Now, those of you that are very well attuned to the investment markets know that this is not 100% of the time true, but it's 99-point-something% of the time accurate, okay? So we'll just assume that it's consistently accurate. So that's what C represents. So if this was a 6% bond, then C would be 1,000 times 0.06, or $60, divided by 2, or $30, and we would get paid that twice a year. That would be our C, $30, okay, per $1,000 bond. Well, then we've got this equation. So it's going to be multiplied by 1 minus 1 divided by 1 plus YTM to the nth power. What is YTM? I'm pretty sure you can understand what 1 represents. 1 means 1, okay? But what is YTM and what is N?
Years to maturity.
Yield to maturity. Yield to maturity. Like, let me even type that out because I'm a little surprised that I hadn't done that yet. So the yield to maturity is going to be the current market yield divided by the periods per year in this case. So this is a periodic amount. It's not an annualized amount. It's a periodic amount. I apparently have spelled yield wrong. So think about this. The current market yield, well, as we've been talking about something that was issued at 10% and now it pays 6%, what we're really saying, a type of bond that was issued at 10%, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, that same type of bond, if it were issued today, might pay 6% because interest rates have come down, okay? And when we're talking about the current market yield, we're talking about what it would cost us to, if we were to issue this exact same type of debt in today's market. So not what it was originally priced at, not what it was originally yielding, but today. The coupon rate would have been synonymous with the yield to maturity at the point that this bond was issued. But once interest rates changed, those two values diverged, okay? So the current market yield, or the rate at which a similar debt instrument of similar size, similar creditworthiness, etc., in the market yields today, and we're going to divide it by the periods per year in order to find the YTM variable's value, or the yield to maturity. So yield to maturity in this equation is not an annualized amount, just like the coupon payment is not an annualized amount. If he peels some of your grapes and put them to you on a platter, Diana, I'm going to faint, okay? You are a very fortunate young woman. There you go. Good for you. Okay.
Hey, Rick, how do you know what the current market yield is? Or am I
Good
missing?
question. So for our purposes in this class, you typically will be given that. But let's assume it's not in this class. Let's assume we have to think about it. Well, if I know that you have a company and your company has a AA credit standard with Standard & Poor's and Moody's, I can go online and I can see at what rate you could borrow $1 million. So it's the going rate for borrowing for some entity like yours and of that credit rating today. We can look at treasury rates for today. We can look at bank lending rates for today. There's all kinds of repositories online that will give us this information. Okay? So what does N stand for? Well, N now is years to maturity. Okay? So the time, there's years to maturity times the periods per year. So that's the periods then to maturity. So notice that I'm expressing C as a periodic value. I'm expressing YTM as a periodic value, and I'm expressing N as a periodic value. We have to express these three variables in the same periodic perspective. If this is semiannual, this must be semiannual, and this must be semiannual. Do not give me an annualized or a full year's YTM and a half of a year's coupon payment, or half a year's number of periods. You've got to express them similarly. Now face value, F is F. It's the face value. Okay?